doesn't care about you. That's why you need a medical emergency kit. It contains life-saving medications like ivermectin, Z-Pak, and antibiotics. Stock them before they block them.
This is a special report.
Knowing how to invest your money is harder than ever before. Dealing with stock market volatility, record debt, and terrorist attacks requires new thinking. At U.S. Asset Management, we can help you see the world more clearly so that you can move beyond the chaos and invest with confidence. Call us, visit us online, or drop by our office. U.S. Asset Management, helping you make better decisions with your money.
Honored today to be with economist and professor at Columbia University, Jeffrey Sachs, who's overseas. He was just in Turkey at a very important conference with a lot of interesting comments that I watched. Thank you for joining us this morning. I appreciate it.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
So I want to talk about your comments in Turkey yesterday, but let's start with China. Is the U.S. decoupling from China at this point?
Well, yes, it is because of these tariffs, which are so high that it is effectively decoupling. Is this a good idea? No. This will do a lot of damage to the U.S. economy, a lot of damage to U.S. consumers. So I'm not sympathetic with this, but unless Trump reverses, this is decoupling.
Will there be some type of new alternative global trading arrangement? Will China be the leader? Will the U.S. be pushed aside? Will the reverse happen? What do you think?
Basically, the U.S. is the one taking actions to isolate itself. Of course, it's put on those so-called reciprocal tariffs, which had nothing to do with reciprocity, so it was just a name given. But then, because that led to panic in the financial markets, Trump reversed mostly, except in the case of China, and left in 10% new tariffs across the world. And his aides are saying there's more to come. You know, you never know with the Trump administration. It changes hour by hour. But the U.S. has taken steps to isolate itself from the rest of the world. And the rest of the world is not taking comparable steps vis-a-vis each other. Some are taking steps towards the U.S., especially China, but they're keeping open trade among themselves. So this is more the U.S. pulling out rather than the system falling down.
What do you, to play devil's advocate, how do you respond to the allegations of predatory trading from China, you know, their actions in the South China Sea, et cetera? What are your, what's your response to that, just to see both sides?
In general, just to understand, when Trump put these so-called reciprocal tariffs in, they were against countries that run a trade surplus with the United States, or with which the U.S. runs a trade deficit. That was more than 100 countries. In the end, because the retaliation came from China, those have stuck. The rest of the world have come back down. But the purpose of these tariffs was not directed at China per se. It was directed at a trade imbalance. Why does the U.S. have a trade imbalance? Trump says, well, we have a trade imbalance because they're all ripping us off. But this is really just the most basic misunderstanding. If you go to a store with your credit card and you buy something, you're in a trade deficit with that store. Did they rip you off, or did you buy something? You bought something. Well, the United States buys a lot. One reason it is that our credit card is the federal government. It runs a large budget deficit by giving money to corporations and to the public, to individuals, say through transfer payments, that it doesn't cover on taxes. And it's like a giant credit card. It's 7% of GDP, 7% of our national product that we're borrowing every year on that national credit card. And that turns into consumption spending. So the government is basically giving the green light to the country to overspend. That shows up as a budget deficit around the world, and Trump interprets that as somehow unfair. My advice to you is if you're running up your credit card debt, don't blame the shops that you're buying from. So it's nothing different from that. Uh, is China fair in its trade? Not in every particular, but is the United States fair in its trade? Certainly not. So is this somehow the U.S. getting ripped off? It's the U.S. doing something dumb, which is running a large budget deficit year after year after year after year. That poses a question. Why does Congress behave this way? Well, there's actually a simple answer to that, which is that congressmen and senators run for reelection based on the donations of rich donors. And those rich donors, almost to a donor, say, keep our taxes low. And so the corporate tax rates and the collections, most importantly, the revenues, that is, have come way, way down. The super rich barely pay taxes. And then the government has Social Security or Medicare, Medicaid, or wars. And then, lo and behold, we're running a deficit. Well, if our political system actually functioned in a halfway honest and decent manner, we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't have the trade deficits, and we wouldn't have these trade wars, which are just going to impoverish Americans.
Interesting. Well, that begs the question in Europe. Is Europe, which is being confronted by a lot of these tariffs, going to move more towards the Chinese under this tariff regime, in your opinion?
Probably yes. Probably yes. Probably every country, when they sit down to figure out what's going on, they're going to say the U.S. is unstable and unreliable. It's blaming us for things that we're not doing. So we better make sure that we can sell at least to others. So China's perspective, well, now the U.S. market is semi-closed. They don't know how closed because every day something new happens. But they won't say, most likely, the U.S. market's closed. Now let's close the market to China too. They probably won't say that. They'll probably say, if we can't sell to the U.S., we need to sell more to China. Now, they're worried that since China can't sell to the U.S., that it will flood the European market with goods. And that's why China and the European Union have said, let's talk to make sure that the adjustments are orderly. I think they'll figure that out, actually. But they won't break trade with each other. They will reinforce trade with each other because the United States has put in this spanner to both Europe and China, pushing the two of them closer together, not farther apart.
Last question on China or the U.S. and our manufacturing issues. How do we bring manufacturing back to the U.S.? Because obviously we can't survive without some of these supply chains being frozen in time of war or whatever. We need some domestic capability. How do we do that?
I think there are two things to understand. One is that there's a lot of manufacturing in the United States. If you measure the value added of manufacturing as a share of national income, it hasn't gone down much. But what has gone down is jobs. So the jobs went from about 19 million back in 1979 to about 13 million today. And in a workforce of 160 million people, that means manufacturing is only around 8% of the employment now. So it's really not an industrial workforce. It's a service economy. Where did those jobs go? Well, not exactly what we're being told. I come from Detroit. I grew up visiting the River Rouge auto plant. So I used to take school tours, family tours, weekend tours of the auto factories. Now, as an adult economist, I've gone to auto plants around the world, not just in the United States, but all over the world. There are no people in them anymore. It's just giant robotic arms, beeping robotic machines carrying parts to and fro. That's true, by the way, That's in Japan, that's in the United States, that's wherever you would go to an auto plant these days. So did automotive production go down? No, but the jobs did. This is a big part of why we went from 19 million to 13 million. Another part is that there used to be pretty grimy, low wage jobs that now are actually being covered by people earning low wages
Hmm.
in other countries. Not so much China because the wages have risen a lot, but still in Mexico and in other places. Now, you could bring those jobs back, but not good jobs. Those aren't good jobs. Those are low wage jobs. And if you try to bring them back, what you would basically do is force down the living standards of Americans, not push them up, but force them down. You'd say, you have to go back to working essentially at the wages that are in Vietnam or in Indonesia or
Hmm.
in Mexico. Well, we got out of that, not because of high unemployment. Our unemployment rate is rather low. We got out of it because the jobs that remain in manufacturing that didn't get automated away or replaced by international value chains are pretty high income jobs right now. They're more sophisticated. They're on the service end of the manufacturing. Maybe their design, their planning, their R&D, their marketing, their finance. There are some production, but generally pretty sophisticated technicians, not the very low wage manual assembly operations that barely exist, but still exist, haven't quite been automated away yet. Do we want those jobs back? Americans would take a cut in living standards to have those jobs back. And this is the irony. Trump says he's protecting manufacturing, but what he's going to do is make American companies that depend on those international supply chains either uncompetitive or pressed to cut the wages in those companies
Hmm.
so that they can actually absorb the kind of lower wage work that was internationalized and now Trump wants to bring back. He's not bringing back high end jobs, if at all. And overall, I can tell you, because we have experience of this from Trump 1 and from
Hmm.
many other countries, he's not bringing back many jobs at all. This is
Hmm.
just not what he thinks.
Let's switch gears to Europe, specifically Ukraine. I have a lot of experience there. Tucker had me on for an hour on Fox Nation talking about this was a couple years ago before this phase of the war. Well, actually, the war was breaking out in 2022. Um, my sense is that the Zelensky regime, for lack of a better word, is desperate to stay in power. I'd like your sense of what's behind that agenda and where do you see things going in Ukraine?
Look, this war, as you saw and as I know from 30 years of experience in the region, should never have happened.
Mm-hmm.
It was a war that was provoked by the United States, not by Vladimir Putin, as we were told, or we were told, unprovoked, unprovoked, unprovoked by people feeding us a whole line of propaganda, but not telling us the truth.
Yeah.
This war came because of the attempt of the United States to expand military bases, NATO bases into Ukraine, and with the United States saying to the Russians, we also reserve the right to put our missile systems in Ukraine
Mm-hmm.
if we want. Well, okay. It's like Russia saying we have the right to put our military bases on the Rio Grande in Mexico. Well, yes and no. It would be a good way to have World War III. So don't
Mm-hmm.
do it. And the United States should have been prudent also. There was a president in Ukraine in 2010 to 2014, up to February 22nd, that wanted neutrality, named Viktor Yanukovych. The
Mm-hmm.
Americans, including one of my colleagues, Victoria Nuland, she's now at Columbia University, she was part of a conspiracy to overthrow him. He wanted neutrality. Neutrality is a dirty word for Americans that want their military bases everywhere. So we basically just couldn't stop being obnoxious. And eventually we went to war. Now, the Ukrainians, I tried to tell them, because I've advised the Ukrainian government on occasion. I tried to tell them this is a trap for you. You're going to get bloodied. I literally use the expression, you will be the Afghanistan of Europe. And by that, I meant you will be bloodied and then abandoned, because this is how these U.S. Regime plays actually work in the end. Oh, they hated my saying it. I got put on a blacklist in Ukraine, enemy of the state, and so forth. I said, I'm
Oh,
not
really?
your enemy. Oh, yeah. I'm not your enemy. I'm your friend. I'm trying to save you from hundreds of thousands of deaths. But the view was, oh, the U.S. has our back. And I kept repeating Henry Kissinger's famous old adage that to be an enemy of the United States is dangerous, but to be a friend is fatal. And I kept telling them, don't believe it. You're just in a long queue from Vietnam, Cambodia, Lao PDR, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Ukraine. This isn't friendly for you. This is extraordinarily dangerous. God, they hated to hear it. Well, anyway, Zelensky sided with the U.S. That's what you do. We got NATO behind us. We have the United States behind us. They gambled badly. Interestingly, when the Russians invaded, the war started, by the way, just the day that Yanukovych was overthrown, which was February 22nd, 2014. And the Russians took back Crimea. Two oblasts, two regions of eastern Ukraine broke away, Donetsk and Lugansk. War started. A treaty, the Minsk treaties 1 and 2, were negotiated to try to hold the peace. Ukraine wasn't interested in the political autonomy for eastern Ukraine called for by those UN-backed treaties. In other words, fighting continued for 8 years until February 22nd, February 24th, 2022, when Russia escalated dramatically by an invasion.
So we are in the factory in Kentucky. This is Alp World HQ, and we are at the end of the packing line. So I'm going to show you how it works. We have the card, throw it in there. There's a packing slip, and then you have the Alp. And 4, but that seems honestly like a lot. 3 now, but it's good. You just pack a punch that, for a normal nicotine brand, it'd be like 8. We think 3 is fine. Next one. Again, 4. I'll throw 3 in just to keep it fair. Okay. There you go. So you can see you can get fast at this, and really it's just a matter of repetition. This is kind of the assembly line that Henry Ford devised so long ago.
Tucker, stealing all the applicants.
Now, what was the purpose of the invasion? The purpose of the invasion was actually to push Ukraine to the negotiating table to accept neutrality, to stop the NATO enlargement. Within a week, Zelensky was saying, okay, neutral. Mm-hmm. And Russia and Ukraine actually sat down with Turkish mediation in Istanbul and hammered out an agreement, which one can find online, from April 15, 2022. It's called the Istanbul Process, and there was a draft agreement. The United States swoops in and says to Ukraine, fight on, don't give up, don't accept neutrality. We're going to get you into NATO. A lot of, I can't say it on your show, but anyway.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was say Boris Johnson had a part of that too, but go ahead.
Yeah, so Boris Johnson was part of that. This is so destructive. And this meant that the war has continued 3 more years because of that, for no reason, except that Ukraine has lost about 1 million deaths and severely wounded since then, and it's lost ground on the battlefield. So nothing came out of this, so completely predictable. Now, because this was a disaster for Ukraine, Zelensky ran out of running room. He couldn't go for re-elections. By the way, the idea you can't have elections in wartime, tell that to Abraham Lincoln. He had an election in 1864. Of course, you can have elections in wartime. The United States had elections throughout World War I and World War II. 1944, Franklin Roosevelt won his fourth term in office. Zelensky couldn't face it, so he declared martial law. So he's a dictator right now. He's operating under martial law. Do I approve or support what he's doing? Absolutely not. What he's doing is sending young, untrained victims to the battle line, to the contact line to die.
Yeah.
For what? He could have had an agreement. He could have an agreement now, but he doesn't accept it.
Do you think there's
now the question is why? You know, part of it is politicians don't abide by the sunk cost idea, which is if you're in a hole, stop digging. For them, they have to prove that they were right. So part of it is, yeah, he's not going to be president again if he says that was a terrible mistake. So he's fighting for his personal survival, not for Ukraine's best interest. The other thing, you know, people say that, well, he's got such extremists around him that would he survive a compromise? Would he get taken out? You know, if that's the truth on one of these foreign trips, he should just stay out, frankly. But to be sending 1,000 to 2,000 young people to death or to grave injury every day for no reason at all, this is unacceptable.
You know, there was so-called land reform in Ukraine, which essentially allowed the peasants to give up their land to, you know, large global corporations. Is there a depopulation part of this as well in Ukraine to this agenda, do you think, or is that too dark?
I don't know if it's planned, but it is rapacious because, you know, BlackRock and others swoop in, buy resources. Trump's not exactly subtle about this, by the way. You know, he's in a protection racket. Oh, you want a little help? Well, give us half your resources. This is a bad place for Ukraine. I told them so, I'm sorry to say, repeatedly.
Well, when all this information came out with the U.S. and the U.K. essentially running the war from Wiesbaden, Germany, and then the U.K. generals on the front line. Fascinating. We'll see where all that goes. But let's move to the Middle East.
Todd, I have to admit something.
Yeah.
I didn't even read that story of the New York Times. You know why? Because that paper is so stupid. It was phony all the way through. Who couldn't know that the U.S. and U.K. were running the war? Did I need them to tell me 3 years later? I knew it every single day. So there's something a little bit, I'm sorry to say, reading that paper is like sucking your thumb. You know, it's so childish. Oh, we have a great revelation. The U.K. and the U.S. are running the war. Duh. You needed 3 years of investigative reporting to figure out that this is a U.S. operation?
Well, it was a limited.
This is the problem.
It was a limited hangout, you know, for the dripping out the truth. I mean, we ran a story in 2020 about the Biden administration through Hunter using American State Department officials in Italy to close private deals for the Biden family. And the New York Times just reported it last week. So, you know,
there you go. You go. It's unbelievable how insulting that paper is to our intelligence. I'm so sorry to say.
Completely agree. Well, it's a mouthpiece for the blob, if you will. Let's move to Turkey. You just were at the, if I pronounce this right, I've been to Turkey many times, but Antalya Diplomatic Forum, is that correct?
Yeah, it's a great annual meeting of basically Middle Eastern, Turkic states. That means into Central Asia, Turkey. It's a terrific meeting, mostly of the region, the greater Middle East, Eastern Mediterranean, Central Asia, Western Asia group. So I had very good discussions there.
Well, your sound bites are moving around the internet rapidly right now. The comments you made there on American involvement in the Middle East. Can you just give us the elevator pitch of what you think on that subject?
Yeah, you know, I was on a panel about Syria, and again, Syria was at war from 2011 to a couple of weeks ago. We don't even know whether it's still at war or not,
Yeah.
because it's still being picked to pieces by Israel and by others. So 14 years, maybe 600,000 dead during that period. And I made the basic point. Yeah, that's another U.S. regime change operation gone bad. I remember I was actually on Morning Joe in 2011 when Obama said Assad must go. Assad was the president of Syria at the time. And they turned to me and said, "What about that, Jeff?" I said, "Oh, an American president saying that the Syrian president must go? That sounds good. How's he going to do that?" Because this is typical American arrogance. And so, of course, what it was a CIA operation, Timber Sycamore, signed probably in 2012, never properly disclosed, though the New York Times ran one page on it in 2016, and many other people have said words about it. But it was a CIA operation to train, arm, equip, finance an insurrection against the president and government of Syria. I personally can't stand this stuff. Just overthrowing governments, creating wars, putting hundreds of thousands of innocents to death over some CIA concoction, which almost always goes very badly, by the way. And so I said this. People were shocked, actually. And somebody said to me, "Oh, Mr. Sachs, you're denying the agency of the Syrian people who rose up against a dictator." And I had to explain, look, I'm not against the agency of the Syrian people, believe me. But war is different from protest. War is billions of dollars of armaments, training, base camps, intelligence, munitions, finance. It's big boy stuff. It's what the United States government specializes in. And don't kid yourself. Sure, there were protests against Assad. People can have terrible views of him. But 600,000 deaths, that came from a war. And the war came from the United States and regional partners wanting a so-called covert regime change operation, not very covert. And incidentally, just like in Ukraine, I happen to know, this was another point that was a little bit disputed on my panel, but I happen to have good information about it, that this war could have ended in 2012 because various political parties to this war in the region said, "Okay, let's stop this." But the United States said, "No, we won't stop this unless Assad leaves the first day of the new agreement." In other words, our bottom line is regime change. So
why is that against Assad, do you think? What was I mean, yeah, he's an Iranian proxy, but he left, and then, HTS killed 10,000 Christians. I mean, so
you said exactly right. He was an Iranian proxy. This was at Israel's behest, not specifically at Israel's behest, at Netanyahu's behest. We fight our wars for Bibi. This is the great disaster of American foreign policy. For a lot of reasons, U.S. Congress and White House leaders gave up American foreign policy in the Middle East to Israel, and not just to Israel, to Bibi. Bibi's been in power most of the time since 1996. And his idea is, look, I'm never going to allow a Palestinian state. And so there's going to be unrest. There's going to be militancy. There's going to be insurgencies. And just like I said, those insurgencies don't exist on their own. They're backed by other governments, whether it's Iran or others that have backed Hezbollah or Hamas, and it's not just, it's many of them. It's governments throughout the region over the past 15 years, because Palestine's being occupied, being slaughtered, being ethnically cleansed. And so there's uprisings, which make total predictable sense. Netanyahu's idea is we're never going to compromise on Palestine. He said it again yesterday. What we're going to do is overthrow every government that supports the Palestinians. It's brutal. And what Netanyahu has done, he's gotten the U.S. to do the dirty work. We paid for it. We've armed them. We've been complicit in all of this. And we know now, going back to the early 2000s, the idea was 7 wars at Netanyahu's behest, basically. Wars in Africa, Libya, Sudan, Somalia, wars in the Middle East, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. And there have been 6 of those 7 wars. The last one is Iran. And we know, you can watch it every day, Netanyahu's trying to egg the U.S. on to a war with Iran at Israel's behest. But again, not Israel, this radical extremist part of Israel that says we don't compromise, we occupy the lands of the Palestinians, we rule over 8 million, we kill them indiscriminately, we bomb their hospitals, we destroy their infrastructure, we throw them out, we ethnically cleanse them. And that's the U.S. partner in all of this. Believe me, it makes no sense for American foreign policy. None at all.
Well,
and the
I think
whole
that will
world is against this.
I think that will be the death of the Trump administration if they have a war with Iran, frankly. Last questions. I know you got to go. Victoria Nuland, she's your colleague now. I can't think of someone else with a bigger hand in the deaths of millions in Ukraine. How does she walk around with a straight face at Columbia? I'm just curious.
Hey, look, my colleagues at Columbia are Hillary Clinton, Victoria Nuland, and Mike Pompeo. This is the new Columbia, so it's quite interesting. I think they're teaching diplomacy, no less. So it's quite a thing. You know, the U.S. has been at war nonstop for decades. These people have been part of this. The U.S. has been overthrowing regimes for decades. What did we get out of this? We got trillions and trillions of dollars of debt. We've got battlefields all over the place. We have instability all over the place. How about trying peace? It's a lot cheaper. That's my advice.
Well, that's what people voted for. Professor, anything else you want to get out to the public? I know you got to run.
No, this is great to talk to you. I hope we do it again.
Excellent. I'd love to. Thank you for your time. Take care.